Back in the cool office, while they waited for the inevitable coffee, Karim opened a cupboard in the wall and pulled out a set of engineer's blue overalls. Karim stripped to his shorts and dressed himself in one of the suits and pulled on a pair of rubber boots. Bond picked out a suit and a pair of boots that more or less fitted him and put them on. With the coffee, the head clerk brought in 2 powerful flashlights which he put on the desk. When the clerk had left the room, Karim said, "He is one of my sons, the eldest one. The others in there are all my children. The chauffeur and the watchman are uncles of mine. Common blood is the best security, and this spice business is good cover for us all. M set me up in it. He spoke to friends of his in the city of London. I am now the leading spice merchant in Turkey. I have long ago repaid M the money that was lent me. My children are shareholders in the business. They have a good life, and when there is secret work to be done and I need help, I choose the child who will be most suitable. They all have training in different secret things. They are clever and brave. Some have already killed for me. They'd all die for me, and for M. They would all die if they had to. I have taught them he is just below God." Karim made a deprecating wave. "That is just to tell you that you are in good hands." "I hadn't imagined anything different." "Ha!" said Karim non-committally. He picked up the torches and handed one to Bond. "And now to work." Karim walked over to the wide glass-fronted bookcase and put his hand behind it. There was a click and the bookcase rolled silently and easily along the wall to the left. Behind it was a small door, flush with the wall. Karim pressed one side of the door and it swung inwards to reveal a dark tunnel with stone steps leading straight down. A dank smell, mixed with a faint zoo stench, came out into the room. "You go first," said Karim. "Go down the steps to the bottom and wait. I must fix the door." Bond switched on his torch and stepped through the opening and went carefully down the stairs. The light of the torch showed fresh masonry and 20 feet below a glimmer of water. When Bond got to the bottom, he found that the glimmer was a small stream running down a central gutter in the floor of an ancient stone-walled tunnel that sloped steeply up to the right. To the left, the tunnel went on downwards and would, he guessed, come out below the surface of the Golden Horn. Out of range of Bond's light, there was a steady, quiet, scuttling sound, and in the blackness, hundreds of pinpoints of red light flickered and moved. It was the same uphill and downhill. 20 yards away on either side, 1,000 rats were looking at Bond. They were sniffing at his scent. Bond imagined the whiskers lifting slightly from their teeth. He had a quick moment of wondering what action they would take if his torch went out. Karim was suddenly beside him. "It is a long climb, a quarter of an hour. I hope you love animals." Karim's laugh boomed hugely away up the tunnel. The rats scuffled and stirred. "Unfortunately, there is not much choice. Rats and bats, squadrons of them, divisions, a whole air force and army. We have to drive them in front of us. Toward the end of the climb, it becomes quite congested. Let's get started. The air is good. It is dry underfoot on both sides of the stream, but in winter the floods come and then we have to use frogmen's suits. Keep your torch on my feet. If a bat gets in your hair, brush him off. It not be often. Their radar is very good." They set off up the steep slope. The smell of the rats and of the droppings of bats was thick, a mixture of monkey house and chicken battery. It occurred to Bond that it would be days before he got rid of it. Clusters of bats hung like bunches of withered grapes from the roof, and when from time to time either Karim's head or Bond's brushed against them, they exploded, twittering, into the darkness. Ahead of them, as they climbed, there was the forest of squeaking, scuffling red pinpoints that grew denser on both sides of the central gutter. Occasionally Karim flashed his torch forward, and the light shone on a grey field sown with glittering teeth and glinting whiskers. When this happened, An extra frenzy seized the rats, and those nearest jumped on the backs of the others to get away. All the while, fighting, tumbling grey bodies came sweeping down the central gutter, and as the pressure of the mass higher up the tunnel grew heavier, the frothing rear rank came closer. The two men kept their torches levelled like guns on the rear ranks until, after a good quarter of an hour's climb, they reached their destination. It was a deep alcove of newly faced brick on the side wall of the tunnel. There were 2 benches on each side of a thick tarpaulin-wrapped object that came down from the ceiling of the alcove. They stepped inside. Another few yards climb, Bond thought, and mass hysteria must have seized the distant thousands of rats further up the tunnel. The horde would have turned, out of sheer pressure for space, and the rats would have braved the lights and hurled themselves down onto the 2 intruders, in spite of the 2 glaring eyes and the threatening scent. "Watch," said Kerim. There was a moment of silence. Further up the tunnel the squeaking had stopped, as if a word of command. Then suddenly the tunnel was a foot deep in a great wave of hurtling, scrambling grey bodies, as with a continuous high-pitched squeal the rats turned and pelted back down the slope. For minutes the sleek grey river foamed by outside the alcove, until at last the numbers thinned, and only a trickle of sick or wounded rats came limping and probing their way down the tunnel floor. The scream of the horde slowly vanished down towards the river, until there was silence, except for the occasional twitter of a fleeing bat. Kerim gave a non-committal grunt. "One of those days, those rats will start dying. Then we shall have the plague in Istanbul again. Sometimes I feel guilty for not telling the authorities of this tunnel so that they can clean the place up. But I can't so long as the Russians are here." He jerked his head at the roof. He looked at his watch. 5 minutes to go. They'll be pulling up their chairs and fiddling with their papers. There'll be the 3 permanent men, MGB, or one of them may be from Army Intelligence, GRU. And there will probably be 3 others. 2 came in a fortnight ago, one through Greece and another through Persia. Another one arrived on Monday. God knows who they are, or what they're here for. And sometimes the girl Tatiana comes in with a signal and goes out again. Let us hope we will see her today. You'll be impressed. She is something. Kerim reached up and untied the tarpaulin cover and pulled it downwards. Bond understood. The cover protected the shining butt of a submarine periscope, fully withdrawn. The moisture glistened on the thick grease of the exposed bottom joint. Bond chuckled. "Where the hell did you get that from, Darko?" "Turkish Navy. War surplus." Kerim's voice did not invite further questions. "Now Q branch in London is trying to fix some way of wiring the damn thing for sound. It's not going to be easy. The lens at the top of this is no bigger than a cigarette lighter. End on, and when I raise it, it comes up to floor level in their room. In the corner of the room where it comes up, we cut a small mouse hole. We did it well. Once, when I came to have a look, the first thing I saw was a big mousetrap with a piece of cheese on it. At least, it looked big through the lens." Kerim laughed briefly. "But there's not much room to fit a sensitive pickup alongside the lens, and there's no hope of getting it in again to do any more fiddling about with their architecture. The only way I managed to install this thing was to get my friends in the Public Works Ministry to turn the Russians out for a few days. The story was that the trams going up the hill were shaking the foundations of the houses. There had to be a survey. It cost me a few £100 for the right pockets. The Public Works inspected 6 houses on either side of this one and declared the place safe. By that time I and the family had finished our construction work. The Russians were suspicious as hell. I gather they went over the place with a tooth comb when they got back, looking for microphones and bombs and so on. We can't work that trick twice. Unless Q Branch can think up something very clever, I shall have to be content with keeping an eye on them. One of these days they'll give away something useful, They'll be interrogating someone we're interested in, or something of that sort. Alongside the matrix of the periscope in the roof of the alcove, there was a pendulous blister of metal, twice the size of a football. "What's that?" said Bond. "Oh, bottom half of a bomb. A big bomb. If anything happens to me, or if war breaks out with Russia, that bomb will be set off by radio control from my office. It is sad." Kerim didn't look sad. "But I fear that many innocent people will get killed besides the Russians. When the blood is on the boil, man is unselective as nature." Kerim had been polishing away at the hooded eyepieces between the two handlebars that stuck out on both sides of the base of the periscope. Now he glanced at his watch, bent down and gripped the two handles, and slowly brought them up level with his chin. There was a hiss of hydraulics as the glistening stem of the periscope slid up into its steel sheath in the roof of the alcove. Kerim bent his head and gazed into the eyepieces and slowly inched up the handles until he could stand upright. He twisted gently. He centered the lens and beckoned to Bond. "Just the 6 of them." Bond moved over and took the handles. "Have a good look at them," said Kerim. "I know them, but you'd better get their faces in your mind. Head of the table is their resident director. On his left are his 2 staff. Opposite them are the 3 new ones. The latest, who looks quite an important chap, is on the director's right. Tell me if they do anything except talk." Bond's first impulse was to tell Kerim not to make so much noise. It was as if he was in the room with the Russians, as if he was sitting in a chair in the corner, a secretary perhaps, taking shorthand to the conference. The wide, all-round lens, designed for spotting aircraft as well as surface ships, gave him a curious picture, a mouse's eye view of a forest of legs below the foredge of the table, and various aspects of the heads belonging to the legs. The director and his 2 colleagues were clear, serious, dull Russian faces, whose characteristics Bond filed away. There was the studious professorial face of the director, thick spectacles, lantern jaw, big forehead, and thin hair brushed back. On his left was a square wooden face with deep clefts on either side of the nose, fair hair en brosse, and a nick out of the left ear. The 3rd member of the permanent staff had a shifty Armenian face with clever, bright, almond eyes. He was talking now. His face wore a falsely humble look. Gold glinted in his mouth. Bond could see less of the 3 visitors. Their backs were half towards him, and only the profile of the nearest and presumably most junior showed clearly. This man's skin also was dark. He, too, would be from one of the southern republics. The jaw was badly shaved, and the eye in profile was bovine and dull under a thick black brow. The nose was fleshy and porous. The upper lip was long over sullen mouth, and the beginning of a double chin. The tough black hair was cut very short, so that most of the back of the neck looked blue to the level of the tips of the ears. It was a military haircut, done with mechanical clippers. The only clues to the next man were an angry boil on the back of a fat, bald neck, a shiny blue suit, and rather bright brown shoes. The man was motionless during the whole period that Bond kept watch, and apparently never spoke. Now the senior visitor, on the right of the resident director, sat back and began talking. He was a strong, crag-like profile with big bones and a jutting chin under a heavy brown moustache of Stalin cut. Bond could see one cold grey eye under a bushy eyebrow and a low forehead topped by wiry grey-brown hair. This man was the only one who was smoking. He puffed busily at a tiny wooden pipe in the bowl of which stood half a cigarette. Every now and then he shook the pipe sideways so that the ash fell on the floor. His profile had more authority than any of the other faces, and Bond guessed that he was a senior man sent down from Moscow. Bond's eyes were getting tired. He twisted the handles gently and looked round the office as far as the blurring, jagged edges of the mouse hole would allow. He saw nothing of interest. 2 olive-green filing cabinets, a hat stand by the door, on which he counted 6 more or less identical grey Homburgs, and a sideboard with a heavy carafe of water and some glasses. Bond stood away from the eyepiece, rubbing his eyes. "If only we could hear," Karim said, shaking his head sadly. "It would be worth diamonds." "It would solve a lot of problems," agreed Bond. Then, "By the way, Darko, how'd you come on this tunnel? What was it built for?" Karim Benson gave a quick glance into the eyepieces and straightened up. "It's a lost drain from the Hall of Pillars," he said. "The Hall of Pillars is now a thing for tourists. It's up above us on the heights of Istanbul near St. Sophia. 1,000 years ago it was built as a reservoir in case of a siege. It's a huge underground palace, 100 yards long, about half as broad. It was made to hold millions of gallons of water. It was discovered again about 400 years ago by a man called Gilius. One day I was reading his account of finding it. He said it was filled in winter from a great pipe with a mighty noise. It occurred to me that there might be another great pipe, to empty it quickly if the city fell to the enemy. I went up to the Hall of Pillars and bribed the watchman and rode about among the pillars all one night in a rubber dinghy with one of my boys. We went over the walls with a hammer and an echo sounder. At one end, in the most likely spot, there was a hollow sound. I handed out more money to the Minister of Public Works and he closed the place for a week for cleaning. My little team got busy." Karim ducked down again for a look through the eyepieces and went on. "We dug into the wall above water level and came on the top of an arch. The arch was the beginning of a tunnel. We got into the tunnel and went down it. Quite exciting, not knowing where we were going to come out. And of course, it went straight down the hill, under the Street of Books where the Russians have their place, and out into the Golden Horn by the Galata Bridge, 20 yards away from my warehouse. So we filled in our hole in the Hall of Pillars and started digging from my end. That was 2 years ago. It took us a year and a lot of survey work to get directly under the Russians." Karim laughed. "And now I suppose one of these days the Russians will decide to change their offices. By then I hope someone else will be head of T." Karim bent down to the rubber eyepieces. Bond saw him stiffen. Karim said urgently, "Ah, the door's opening. Quick, take over. Here she comes."